whole of the UK were in London. By the time I stepped down, we had none of the poorest 20 because we invested massively in transport infrastructure. We got crime well under control. We'd boosted technology. We closed the opportunity gap. So the bottom quartile of society had come up the fastest in their prosperity and their life expectancy. And we can do the same for the whole country with massive investments in infrastructure. And what I think is a fantastic thing you can do, which is not just the east-west, the Oxford-Cambridge motor link, motorway link. Car, thank you. But also, thanks Nadine, but also railway. And if you think about it, you start to create corridors of growth. So you have our great capital, the M25, and then this thing. And it will be absolutely fantastic for the growth and development of the country. But you also need to be levelling up education funding. It's been far too low in some parts of the country. You need to level it up so that there's more equality and fairness. Every kid should have that same basic tool to take advantage of their talents. Increase education funding, put more police out on the street, and you'll have seen what we've said about that. That's what we did in London. It absolutely works. And final thought, it's time to roll out full fibre broadband across the whole country and radically accelerate the timetable for full fibre broadband. It is pathetic. In Spain, they have something like 90% coverage. 90% coverage. We're here in this country, only 7%. People in the eastern region, Cambridgeshire, where are we? Norfolk, thank you, Liz. They're staring at the pizza wheel of doom, whilst in Spanish pueblos in Andalusia they have speed of light access to the internet. We should radically accelerate full fibre provision and no more mañana attitude here in the UK. And people will say, well, how are you going to pay for it? How do you do it? Well, it is very, very simple. We believe, as Conservatives, in the strength and dynamism of our market economy. And we believe in the symmetry of that approach. And we support business, we support enterprise, we support industry, because that is the way. We support the wealth creators in our society, because that is the way to pay for fantastic infrastructure and a great national health service and a fantastic education. That is how you do it. That's the symmetry at the heart of modern conservatism. And of course, there's one person who doesn't get that at all, or a group of people, I should say, and that is Jeremy Corbyn and the London Labour left. And we know the threat that they pose. It's not just that they back Hamas and Hezbollah and the IRA and the mullahs of Tehran over our friends in the United States of America when it comes to what's happening in the Persian Gulf. It's far, far worse than that. These guys represent an economic disaster for the UK. They would put up taxes on inheritance, on pensions, on income, up to 50%, a corporation tax up to the highest in Europe, choking growth. They would even have a tax on gardens, my friends. A fact I revealed to the people of Sevenoaks and told them they would have to change their name to Three Oaks as a result of what Corbyn proposes to do. He would be an economic disaster for our country. Do we want Jeremy Corbyn and the London Labour left to take the keys of this fantastic country and this fantastic economy? No, we don't. No, we absolutely don't. We can defeat him, and we can simultaneously prick the twin puffballs of the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats that are sprouting saprophytically and feeding off the sense of decay in trust in politics. We can come from behind, we can win, and we can win big. We did it. I may say the last time I had to defeat an emanation of the London Labour left, it was in 2012 when we came from behind, when our great party, the Conservative Party, was 17 points behind Labour in London. We came from behind then, we won, we did it before, we'll do it again. Thank you very much for listening to me this morning. I hope very much that I can count on your support. Thank you. Sorry, I'm overran. Sorry.
I love the fact that Liz Truss has become your prompt.
Well, I think both Nadine and Liz actually were very helpful there.
Let's start off with a question about press freedom, because over the last 24 hours, the Metropolitan Police has advised newspaper editors that they could face criminal charges from the Official Secrets Act if they publish more diplomatic cables. What's your response to that?
I have to say I'm very perplexed by this, Ian, because I've just seen what Neil Basu is supposed to. I have high regard for Neil, by the way. He used to work with me. But I don't think that can possibly be right. Yes, whoever leaked the diptels of Kim Darroch should be prosecuted with the full force of the law because he or she is plainly breaking the terms of his or her employment, obviously. And as I've said many times in this whole debate, it's vital that civil servants should be able to speak their minds freely to ministers without fear or favour. That's absolutely right. So it's, whoever has done it must be prosecuted. That's hunted down and prosecuted. But I have to say that it cannot conceivably be right that newspapers or any other media organisation publishing such material should face prosecution. Because in my view, there is no threat to national security implied by the release of this material. It is embarrassing, but it is not a threat to national security. And it is the duty of media organisations to bring new and interesting facts into the public domain. That's what they're there for. So I think that a prosecution on this basis would actually amount to an infringement of press freedom and have a chilling effect on public debate. That's my view.
One of your leading supporters, Michael Fallon, the MP for Three Oaks, he said this morning on the Today programme, if they're receiving stolen material, they should just give it back to their rightful owner. The Mail on Sunday must make their decision. Now, that doesn't quite accord with what you've just said.
And I have a massive. Well, I don't think it's entirely inconsistent. Well, I have a great regard for Michael. What he's saying there is that the Mail on Sunday must make its decision. I'm making a case for press freedom and for the right of newspapers to put important facts into the public domain. Some of you may know there is a system by which editors, when there are matters of national security, that there is a system called the D notice, where if there are things that the security services think would really be, frankly, not conducive to the public good if published, editors generally obey that, and they show great self-restraint in my experience, and that's the way the system operates. But I don't think these particular revelations fall into that category.
Immigration, which we're told is the subject on everybody's lips, yet it's actually come up relatively rarely in these hustings, I think you'd probably agree. What is your approach to immigration? Because in the past you've had a fairly liberal attitude to it.
Yes. I mean, look, I think that I was mayor of the greatest city on earth, 300 languages spoken on the streets of London. It's always been my view that the capital did profit from the incredible diversity of London, its ability to attract talented people from around the world. And it was one of my proudest boasts, I seem to recall, that we had more French people living in London than in Bordeaux. A fact that scandalised the mayor of Bordeaux when he came to see me. But it remains a fantastic. It's a great credit to our country. It's one of the reasons that the UK is going to be by 2050 the most prosperous economy in Europe, because we have London and the South East are the most dynamic regions of the whole of Europe. Now, I also think that there's an issue of democracy. Because I think that actually I can make that case about immigration, but it's up to me as an elected politician to defend and explain my belief that people of talent, on the whole, should be able to come if they can show that they have a job to come to in the UK. But what I think people found unacceptable was the idea that there was no control at all for a group of 580 million people who were able to come and go and treat and think of the UK conceptually as part of their own country. And that was the problem. And I think that what we want is a democratically controlled immigration system whereby we can continue to welcome people who can contribute to the UK economy, but done by an Australian-style points-based system. That is what we should do. Put that into effect so that people... If the agricultural sector in Norfolk needs people to come and pick the turnips or whatever,
you just lost the Norfolk vote.
Well, you know what I mean. And lots of other things, obviously. Then there should be a system. There should be a system that is transparent and intelligible by which they can come when the jobs are available. And we have the internet now, and we will have full fibre broadband, as I've just said. And so it is entirely credible for people to come on the basis of an existing job in the UK and an existing job offer. I think we are a generous country. We're a welcoming country. All we want is control. I think it's an entirely reasonable aspiration.
Do you accept that there are many people, particularly from Eastern Europe, who are now put off coming to this country to do the jobs in Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, Lincolnshire that need to be done, that British people don't seem to want to do, and they're not coming now in the numbers, and the farmers are finding it incredibly difficult to recruit that kind of labour?
Well, thanks. I think that it's very important that people don't feel put off, and that people in the agricultural sector who need such labour should be able to advertise and to attract it. And I also think, by the way, that there is an opportunity. This country, let's face it, over the last 20, 30 years, certainly since 2004, has had an approach. Let me put it this way. We've tended to import a lot of labour without necessarily focusing as much as we might have done on skilling up kids in our own country, our own FE system, to do the jobs. And sometimes that has led some companies in some sectors not to invest in capital and in modernising their factory or their plant in the way that they could have. So we've used a lot of human labour rather than from abroad, and I think those two distortions also need to be addressed. I want to see kids growing up in this country getting fantastic skills, high-paid jobs, and I want UK business and industry to be as efficient as possible. So that should also be compatible with a broadly open approach to immigration.
10 years or so ago, you floated the idea of an amnesty for illegal immigrants. Why did you do that, and do you think that's something that you might look at as Prime Minister?
I tell you why I did that. I did that for the very simple reason that there are probably 500,000 people in London alone who do not have, who are, as they say in Spanish, sin papeles. They are not able to take part in the economy. They're not able to pay taxes. They're not able to contribute to the life of the community in all sorts of ways because they failed to register themselves properly. They failed to declare their presence in society, and this goes on for years and years and years and years, so that they can be there for a decade or more. And the real question we have to ask ourselves is, are we really willing, and we had this, I'm afraid, with the whole Windrush thing, where we discovered suddenly that, theoretically a group of people status was not totally in order, and we got ourselves into a terrific mess. Because the logic said that we should be deporting people, but actually, on any compassionate, common sense view of the situation, that was the wrong thing to do. So the reason I championed that policy was, I think, if people have been here for 12 years or more, or some long period, and they have not got in trouble with the law, and they've contributed to society, and they've been basically good, they've worked hard and all the rest of it, but they can't pay tax, and they still have officially have a criminal status, then I don't think it's commonsensical to think that we can deport such a large number of people, and we do need to think about how to regularize their status. That's all I'm saying.
So that's something that, as Prime Minister, you would want your Home Secretary to look at?
I would, yes. Well, actually, I remember talking about this a lot to Amber when she was Home Secretary, and I tell you a terrible truth, my friends. The reality is that is more or less what we do already. If you look at how we treat people who've been here for a long time and who have not been in trouble with the law, we do not, on the whole, put them on planes because it is very, very difficult legally to do so. And you will find the numbers of people we actually deport on that basis who have been here for a very long time is vanishingly small. So what I'm proposing would probably not make much practical difference to the existing state of affairs. It would merely regularize what is already going on. The question is, this is the serious question, could you do it without creating a pull factor. And that is a serious objection. And I think people who take my view about an amnesty have to answer that objection. And we have to show that we would simultaneously deport first bounce, as it were, people who are coming in illegally. So you need to toughen up on the current wave of illegals while being more compassionate towards those who've been here for a long time. But you'd have to do the first thing as well.
Right, let's go to questions. Now, it's going to be quite difficult for me to see people at the back, so I apologise if I misgender you in any way. I have great empathy for.
This is the modern Conservative Party. We're totally.
Right, lady there. We have glamorous assistants with microphones. So the lady there, and then was there somewhere, and then the gentleman down here. If you say your name, please, as well.
Yes.
And do hold the microphone to your mouth. It's amazing the number of people who think you can hold a microphone down here.
Hello.
Hello.
Annette Alexander from Swaffham. I have met you, Boris, in Shepherd's Bush.
Ooh. Right.
No, Boris came to visit Neighbourhood Watch coordinators and Belinda Donovan, the mayoress of Hammersmith.
Yes,
we met on Brook Green.
That's right.
Yes, it was after the riots.
Come on, get on
Anyway,
with it.
the question is, I am deeply concerned about the amount of stabbings occurring around the country, seemingly ever-increasing knife and gang-related crime and drug dealing. Are you concerned about the lack of positive youth engagement? And what is your plan and strategy to tackle these increasingly pernicious crimes?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. I remember we met in a sort of porter cabin, didn't we? Listen, there are two very important points. The first is that there's no question that all phenomena radiate out from the metropolis, and the county lines drugs gangs are disseminating a culture of drugs and knives throughout the country, and indeed gun crime as well. And we need to crack it. And the way to crack it is to round up the key nominals, the people behind these gangs, these county lines gangs, because they're preying on young kids, using them as mules, as gophers in their exploits. We need to round them up, number one. Round them, really crack down hard on them. Number two, we need to deal with the actual symptoms of what is going on the streets in the form of knife crime with, I'm afraid, an accelerated program of stop and search. And that has begun, and I congratulate the Home Secretary Sadge on what he's doing now. He's trying to get behind it a lot now, and I think he's totally right. And I just remind you that when it can be fixed, this, folks. Do not despair. Do not despair. When I took over as mayor of London 11 years ago, we had a very, very similar spate of knife crime, and we were losing kids. About 30 teenagers a year were being stabbed to death, and we had a very, very high murder rate. And what we did, we put a lot of police out on the streets with the specific instructions to take knives off the kids. And they took 11,000 knives off the streets of London in a little over a year. Serious youth violence went down about 32%. The murder rate went down 50%. That is the way to do it. But it is very important as a party that we love the police and that we back them, and that they not only feel that they have the legal cover to do what they need to do, because stop and search is a pretty emotionally challenging thing to do, even for a police officer, because you're asking someone to turn out their pockets and produce a knife. It's the right thing to do. There's nothing more loving and kinder to do than to ask a kid to produce a knife. But we have to back them legally, and we also have to back them politically and give them the top cover to do what they signed up to do.
Okay, right, the gentleman down here, and then right at the back, wave your hand if you think yep, you in the middle there.
Hello, I'm Neil Sinclair from Milton Keynes. I'm originally from New Zealand, but I've been living here since 2003. I spent 22 years in the military defending Queen, country, Commonwealth and allies from external forces and protecting our democracies, only to find more recently that the real threat for us has been internally from politicians not honouring our democratic votes here in the UK. What do you intend to do to actually bring about and help control some of these rogue MPs who aren't honouring party manifestos and honouring the will of the people to actually put in place what needs to be done? I mean,
well, thank you, and thank you for what you've done for Queen and Country, and I by the way, you'll have seen what we've said about the military covenant and the protection of veterans. Just purely incidentally, I think that is also what politicians should be doing in recognition and in respect of our armed services. But on the rogue MPs, well, I think actually that there is an outbreak of common sense taking place. And I listened to what some of my colleagues have said, people who weren't perhaps very enthusiastic about coming out of the EU, were certainly not enthusiastic at all about coming out with no deal, and they're starting to move. And I'll tell you why. They're moving because our party is staring down the barrel, where we've lost hundreds of thousands of votes to, not just to the Brexit party, but also, of course, to the Liberal Democrats. And they're really functions of the two phenomenon, the same phenomenon, which is people can sense that we're not delivering on this issue. And so people's objections are very, very strong, because this is a matter of democracy. Politicians asked the people what they thought about membership of the European Union. And it was right to ask the people, because after 45 years, the EU had evolved into something very different from what we joined in 1973. And people voted in large numbers. I mean, it was the biggest ever popular vote for any proposition. They voted to leave with a substantial majority, given the strength of the forces that were on the other side of the argument. And politicians vowed to put that into effect. They triggered Article 50. They said they would do it. And then we failed to do it. So I think people recognise in the House of Commons that this is a matter now, a crisis of trust in politics. And people understand that unless we get this thing done, unless we get it over the line, then our party, the Conservative Party, won't recover, and nor will the Labour Party either, by the way. I mean, they're with heroic incompetence, they're on 18% in the polls. So I think that common sense is breaking out on both sides of the
But where is common sense breaking out? Because this week we've had Dominic Grieve trying to stop you proroguing Parliament by some arcane parliamentary measure. You've had two members of the Cabinet, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, going on television saying he will do anything to stop Parliament being prorogued. And you've got Greg Clark yesterday, the Business Secretary, also making these comments. Where is this common sense?
Because all these excellent people that you mentioned, there's no need to prorogue Parliament, provided they do the right thing and get us out on October the 31st.
But they will try and stop you getting out on October the 31st and, under no deal by any means possible. Well, you know that.
Well, I think it has been the policy of the Conservative government for a long time to prepare for no deal, I think, hasn't it? Yes.
Well, I'm not sure the I'm not sure.
I think
I'm not sure
a fact
that
even my good friend the Chancelier de l'Échiquier, he knows, he understands that. He and I both campaigned on the same manifesto to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, and that's the right thing to do. And we will.
But
I think we will get a better deal.
Boris, you were sitting around the cabinet table with Philip Hammond and Greg Clark, where they were both doing
not
everything
always,
they
not always
could.
in a state of perfect harmony, I must say.
Because they were doing everything they could to frustrate no-deal preparations, and they're continuing to do that, aren't they?
Well, actually, that's a very good point, Ian. Actually,
I thought so.
Characteristically good point, if I may say so. How many have we done of these now?
This is my
We're turning into
8th.
This is your 8th.
Yes.
Okay. God, you're 8th. I can't. Anyway, thank you. Well, thank you for everything. But look, the truth is actually that by March the 29th, a huge amount of the heavy lifting had been done, and we were in a state of high preparedness. Since then, things have rather fallen off. But a lot of work has been done, whether it's on aviation or financial services. A huge amount is ready. I want to stress that I don't want a no-deal outcome. I don't want any kind of disruptive or disorderly Brexit. You get what I... But what we must be ready for it, because that is the only way to be convincing to our European Union friends. If they think that we're going to bottle it again, they simply won't give us the deal we need. Do you get me? And so that is the way forward. And we can get ready. There are things we need to do with the agricultural sector in particular. There are things we need to do to prepare the chains of authority in Northern Ireland, and I would be great if Stormont was up and running again, but it's not absolutely essential, but it'd be great if it was. There are various things we need to do by the 31st of October, but we can do them. And I think what this country wants, after 3 years of drift and dither and delay, is a sense that it can do this, and that we can get ready, because believe me, we can. And we're a great country, and I think it's about time the British people heard that.
Right. The person at the back that I pointed to, and then lady here. No, I did say 3 times, right at the back. Go on. It wasn't you, but never mind.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning.
Good morning.
Fellow Essex person and then Norfolk, of course. Tis Baskerville.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Baskerville.
That's right.
Hello.
I've had a meeting with you in your office.
No, let's get the questions out.
Given my non-Brexit question, given that the Conservatives need to capture the women's vote to win the next election, what would you do to secure that vote?
Well, I totally agree, and just a few points. Number one, we've got to show that we are the party that promotes women, and we will, and I will make sure that we have lots of. I'm embarrassed. There are fantastic female MPs now.
Female Chancellor of the Exchequer.
No, I know somebody shouted that on the way in. It would be invidious. It would be invidious at this stage of me, ladies and gentlemen, to comment on the future composition of the cabinet. It would also be, frankly, presumptuous. I'm not going to do that. But I've never known a time when there were so many talented women on our benches. Don't forget, we are also which party has produced 2 female prime ministers? Not the Labour Party. Labour's got a massive problem with chauvinism, in my view. We will promote women. We will do fantastic things to improve childcare. I think if you can crack childcare, give people really reliable access to affordable childcare, whichever party really gets that will win for a long time to come. Well, we've tried. I think there are new things we need to do to integrate childcare with primary education, all sorts of things that I'm thinking about that we tried in London. I think childcare is crucial. Final thought is a crime. I remember, it may sound a bit weird, but I remember when I was mayor, when we were doing really well on crime, I noticed that our support amongst women voters went up. I think safety in the streets, safety in public space is very important for everybody, but of course it's important for women too.
Just one follow-up on that, and I completely get you're not going to form your cabinet in public.
Oh, come on, Ian.
No, I just said I completely get you're not going to do
yes,
that.
go on.
But you could commit to replicating what's happened since 2008, when there's always been a woman in one of the great offices of state.
God, I mean, that, well...
Why is that difficult?
Of course, it's a brilliant question. Of course, it's a brilliant question.
How about answering it?
I would love to do that. Is that as close as I can get to an answer?
No, you could say I will do that.
Well, I think okay. How many great officers of state are there?
3. Chancellor, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary.
Okay, well, let me say this. I wouldn't be at all surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if we end up by satisfying Ian's request. But.
Right. The lady there, and then at the back in the centre, wave your hand if you... Now, they're all waving. The one that's really waving the hand, that one, yeah. Right.
Good morning. My name is Heather Wilson.
Good morning.
From Northampton, a retired school teacher. If there was a written exam on all international trade conventions affecting Brexit options, such as, but not limited to, Clause F5C, which candidate would be top of the class?
Well, that's a very good question. I used to do very, very well in written examinations, I can tell you. Look, I think perhaps your serious question is, is there scope within the GATT treaty to come out with a standstill agreement between us and the EU, and there is ample scope to do so. It does depend, as both paragraphs 5b and paragraph 5c, and probably 5d, for all I know, as they make clear, it does depend on mutuality. It does depend on us both doing it. Now, the question is, will the EU want to be flexible? Will they want to come to some sort of agreement with us? And I think, overwhelmingly, given the huge balance of trade surplus they have with us, given the advantages to businesses and citizens on both sides of the channel, I think that they will want to do a deal. And I'm very, very optimistic about it. But in order to get there, you do have to prepare to come out on straightforward WTO terms without even making use of that fabled paragraph.
But in these hustings, Jeremy Hunt's, one of his selling points is that he thinks they will do a deal with him because they see him as a much more reasonable person to deal with.
Well, you know,
why would they more likely to do a deal with you?
I think the reasons why I think our friends and partners will want to do a deal now is that politics has changed since March the 29th. They can see that they've got all these Brexit MEPs. How should I put it? I don't want to sound too rude about Brexit MEPs, but they're not being wholly constructive in the debates in Strasbourg. They don't seem to be full of the ode to joy. It's the biggest group in Strasbourg now. They also have the incentive that. There is the 39 billion. They want this thing done. They want this thing closed off. They're fed up with Brexit just as much as I think we are. And they also have the great benefit now of having an interlocutor in the UK. So they will, I hope, have the benefit, if I'm lucky enough to win, they'll have the benefit of an interlocutor who actually knows what the UK wants and has a clear plan to take us forward. And I think, if I may say so, one of the problems we've had over the last 3 years has been there's a terrible absence of decision about whether we're coming. Are we staying in the customs union? Are we going to remain subject to the rules of the single market or not? And it's very clear to, I think, most people in this room that if you're going to leave the EU, then you're going to take advantage of leaving the EU by being able to set your own rules, by being able to do free trade deals, by being able to control your own tariffs, and to turbocharge the UK economy by doing things differently if we have to. Because there are lots of areas in which the UK absolutely knocks spots off the rest of the world. And we may not want to be subject forever to the lunar pull of EU regulation. And that's why the backstop and the whole withdrawal agreement was so badly conceived. And that's why it was important to get rid of it. And what they will have in me, I hope, is somebody who has some clarity and a desire to push on and take a decision. And what I heard from Brussels for a long time, and I have many friends in Brussels, you may be interested in, was they just didn't know what we wanted. And they couldn't understand what the UK position really was. And they've offered several times.
But you were Foreign Secretary.
Well, I know. I kept telling them what I thought we should do, and then I'm afraid other members of the cabinet went and said something else.
Right.
But I think the programme will be clear. We will get a great deal. We will do a free trade agreement, and then we can be more positive about our friends and partners. One of the sad things about the last 45 years is that lots of bilateral relations with Germany, for instance, tourism with Germany, educational exchanges with Germany, it's all fallen away. We should be speaking German. How many people speak German in this audience? That's pretty good, actually. How many people speak French? Formidable. Okay, but but I'm afraid we represent a certain generation. Kids don't, and that's one of the paradoxes of this whole situation, which is that we always told that it's the younger generation that are more pro-European. Well, fantastic, but then let's make them genuinely pro-European by learning to love other European cultures and speak those languages as well. That's, for me, is being a real European.
Well, if I hadn't learned German at school and gone on school exchanges, I wouldn't actually be sitting here now. That's how important it was in my life, so you're absolutely right on that.
Crucial.
Right, we have a clock here that tells us how long we've got. We've got 10 minutes and 26 seconds, so let's try and get as many questions in. So if we could have, shall we say, slightly briefer answers.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll try
over
and
the
have
next
it.
10 minutes. Right, the person there, have you got the microphone? Yeah. And then we'll have the gentleman here.
Good morning. Councillor Ruth Betson from South Cambridgeshire District Council. We've had a bit of bad luck in South Cambridgeshire recently. In 2018, we lost the District Council to the Liberal Democrats, and then earlier this year, highly publicised, our MP resigned the whip. What can you do to help us to turn South Cambridgeshire blue again?
Well, I hope very much that you will secure the services of a wonderful Conservative candidate. It's Heidi, was it? Okay. Well, she's obviously off the agenda. I think we will make sure.
Wouldn't you like to have her back?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a matter for the people of South Cambridgeshire. What do they want? What? Okay, right. There's not much enthusiasm for that. I think what we should do is find another superb candidate, and I will undertake to make sure that we help you in any way that we can. I would just I haven't perhaps done enough blowing my own trumpet this morning, probably too much. But my campaign already has the support of more than half of the parliamentary party, and it's growing the whole time. And that is because we do represent a very, very wide coalition of views and approaches. But we're all united in a vision for what I call modern conservatism, or one nation conservatism, and it's about that balance between free markets and great public services. And it's very, very simple. We will help you get elected, get a great Conservative candidate, and I also undertake my fellow Conservatives to fill our coffers brimful of cash. How about that?
Right.
But I think we need that too.
Gentleman there, and then gentleman there.
Good morning, Ralph Munzer from Harpenden. If you become the leader of our party, what will you do to ensure that young people see the light and vote Conservative?
Young people, my fellow Conservatives, how many times have I sat before great audiences of people, shall I say, of my age, and we all say we must recruit more young people, and then I say we must build more homes, and look, slight anxiety descends. We can do it. We can do it. It's about giving young people a stake in society, a stake in home ownership. They've got to have it. We had it when we were young. They've got to have it. It's absolutely vital. But you can do it without destroying the green belt. You can do it without building on greenfield sites. And we should be using transport infrastructure to build young people the homes they need in the right places. That's what we should be doing.
Okay, and then you, in the orange.
Oh, hello. I'm Rami, and I'm a medical student. So my question is, for the NHS to work, it needs to recruit and retain doctors. So in the last week, we found that there was an article about the pension changes for the NHS consultants. So my question is, what measures are you going to take to help retain doctors?
Thank you very much. So this is the pension cap, the 1.1 million pension cap, which is a real problem, and I've raised it with Matt, who is also backing our campaign, and he has told me, he swore to me the other day that it was going to be sorted out. So we're going to fix it. I think it applies, of course, not just to doctors, but to all sorts of professions. I'm looking at the Chief Secretary of Treasury. We're fixing that one, aren't we?
We are. We're going to simplify the tax system and sort that out.
Okay, well, according to Liz, we're going to simplify the tax system and sort that out. But it's got to be done, because this has now been raised with me 3 or 4 times in the course of this campaign. So we got to knock it on the head.
Right, lady there, followed by, let's go right to the back of the room again. The hand up, the other one that's waving, which I did actually mean you last time, but.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm over here. Hello.
Hello.
Boris. I want to ask a question on behalf of millions of single people.
Yes.
I'm somebody who is actually Bedfordshire and had the benefit in London of you being a brilliant mayor, and I want to thank you for that. And my question, I've written it down, is why in the 21st century, as a single person, the millions of single people have no voice on 40% inheritance tax. And it's time that this is abolished as unfair in the face of heterosexual and gay marriage, and it marginalises and takes undue advantage of singletons. It's taken 4 generations for me as a woman to be standing here today addressing this group and trying to raise this important question. Scottish and Irish parents who started with nothing. My Scottish grandfather was in the D-Day landings at Arromanches, aged 50, and I've worked hard within the Japanese community and doing fine art in order to build relations around the world. Why should it be that I am not entitled to have and hand on simply because I and millions of others are not married?
Okay.
Well,
this
thank
is
you.
an anomaly.
Okay, thank you. We got the point.
Well, no. Well, thank you so much for that question. And look, I'm going to have to, and there should plainly be no discrimination as between singletons and anybody else, whatever their status. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to acquaint myself in more detail of the facts, if I may, and come back to you with a proper response, because I wasn't aware of this discrimination, and obviously, where there is an unfairness, we must stamp it out. But thank you for drawing it to my attention.
Right. Person at the back, and then gentleman there who stood up, which is always a good sign that you'll be picked.
Boris, Tom Herman from the North Norfolk Conservative Association, Nelson's constituency.
Nelson, fantastic.
Winston Churchill made himself very unpopular in the 1930s, calling for rearmament. Do you see the international situation deteriorating today, and do you think 2% of GDP is enough for defence spending?
Well, I think that the international situation is... there are many serious causes for concern, but I don't think at the moment that we face an existential strategic threat, certainly not of the kind that we faced in the 1930s, nor even, I think, of the kind that we faced during some of the grimmest bits of the Cold and most uncertain bits of the Cold War. We do face a couple of very serious threats. They are terrorism springing from the arc of instability in the Middle East and South Asia, and everybody understands the ramifications of that and the way that washes up on our shores, the effect it has in communities in this country. And then, of course, there is the disruptive behaviour of Russia, and we saw that particularly in the poisonings in Salisbury, the Skripal poisonings in Salisbury. I don't think that we need to rearm in the sense that we did in the 1930s, but we clearly need a very strong defence capability. I'm not going to give a percentage now because I'm fed up with making spending commitments and don't want to. But what I do think we should be doing is, and getting back to what the point the gentleman was making earlier from who served in the armed forces, we should be backing our armed forces, and we should certainly be making sure they are properly supplied and equipped. And if there's one obsession I have at the moment, it is shipbuilding. I think that building ships for the Royal Navy is a fantastic thing. I was up in Govan, as I only want short answers, but very, very quickly, and I was just mind-blowing to see the young people from Glasgow getting high-skilled jobs making these Type 26 frigates, which we are selling around the world, and they are. And I'm a total convert to building more ships, as I think Churchill was before the First World War as well as the Second World War, if memory serves me right. But I don't think that I see that those ships will be used for all sorts of things, whether it is stopping piracy off Somalia, or helping stop the tide of refugees across the Mediterranean, or whatever it happens to be. I don't believe, I pray, that they won't be engaged in defending this country against an existential threat of the kind we faced in the 1930s. But they represent great value for this country.
But your opponent says that we should increase the 2% limit, and he wants to spend £15 billion doing so. You're not willing to match that.
I think it's very important if you're going to spend, if you're going to set a new percentage for spending. I mean, don't forget, the UK is already the second biggest military contributor to NATO. I mean, we're right up there. We spend, by European comparisons, we're big spenders on defence. If you're going to spend a lot more, then I think you need to have a pretty clear strategic vision for where the money is going. I don't think we should be setting more arbitrary spending targets without having an understanding of what we want to do with it. And I've given one indication. I think shipbuilding is a great thing. I think it's a great export market for the UK. But I want to see some evidence of strategy before committing untold billions.
The clock has run out, but I did call you, so please ask your question, sir. Microphone.
Hi, Boris. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
My name is Manas Deb. I'm member of South Cambridgeshire Conservative Association and also an executive member of Conservative Friends of India.
Yes.
In your several hustings, you have said that you will come out of EU on 31st October, suggesting that you might crash out of EU. Being a businessman, I feel that you might put thousands of businesses at risk if at all you come out without a deal, and if it might affect import tariff on all businesses who import 90% of their raw materials from EU countries. That's first part of my question. What will you do?
Let's get to the question.
Yeah, what will you do to save businesses? And the second part of my question is, India being the 5th largest economy and aiming to become $5 trillion economy, how will you improve our business relation with India going forward?
Thank you very much. Well, listen, first of all, on no deal preparations, I think I've given a bit of a picture of what we're going to do to protect the agricultural sector, protect just-in-time supply systems, and all the rest of it. But I stress we must get ready to come out on those terms, and we will be ready. There are some people, and Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, or former governor of the Bank of England, who actually thinks that a no-deal Brexit would be a boost to UK GDP because we would rake in so much in tariffs on BMWs and all the rest of it. I don't think that is the way forward. He talks about 35 billion euros. I don't think that is the way forward. That is not the way we're going to go. We're going to go for a standstill arrangement while we negotiate the free trade deal. So you should have absolutely nothing to fear, provided we prepare. I was in Dover, I think, was it yesterday? I can't remember. Day before yesterday. And day before yesterday. And the optimism of the Port of Dover about being able to deal with this was in such sharp contrast with some of the vaporous negativity that's been rising off certain sections of the political establishment. They think they can do it. They think they can get business ready with all the forms that they need, and they think that we can have it. And I'm absolutely certain that we can. And on India, look, I've led many trade delegations to India, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for this country. But we must do far more, far more. The trade with China has gone up by about 45% in the last 10 years. Trade with India has not increased I think actually volumes have remained almost static. And we need to do far more. India is a massive natural market for the UK, but I would also like to see India opening up to some of our great brands. In India, Sainsbury's can't set up. They have no Waitrose. In India. Just imagine that. People of east of England, because it's not allowed. Then you're not allowed multi-brand stores of the kind that the UK specialises in. The legal services, professional services, there are huge markets for the UK in India that need to open up. So I hope you will join us and build the movement for opening up trade in India for the UK.
Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
given my incompetent chairing, we went 4 minutes over there, so you'll have an extra 4 minutes with Jeremy Hunt as well. Before we meet Jeremy, let's have a look at his campaign video.
The most striking quality about Jeremy Hunt was his unwavering commitment to get results. I think perhaps part of that is to do with his background in business. No matter what the obstacles were, he was prepared to push through them. He wanted to get results.
I've seen him deliver on the things that matter most to the British people. He has credibility from all sides. I trust him on Brexit.
I've known Jeremy for 40 years, and about 25 of those years we've worked together, setting up various businesses. Those early days were absolutely about his determination and grit. He would never give up.
When I first met Jeremy, I realised he was a man who actually was committed to making a difference.
In 2008, I lost my baby son Joshua as a consequence of serious failures in his care during my campaign to kind of uncover the truth about what happened. I was struggling to be heard, and Jeremy really listened and treated me as a grieving dad rather than a troublemaker. I knew that this was somebody who was going to change things.
My mum died quite tragically in poor care in Mid-Souths. Jeremy was incredibly kind. He saw the bereaved daughter behind the campaigner, and he saw it was people that mattered.
I have known Jeremy Hunt since the early 2000s. He and his business partner started funding the education of children living with HIV in our community-based programme. Jeremy's generosity was sensed by us all.
That desire to make a difference really drives him. It's never been about him. It's always been about what he can do to help others.
The work he's done will save the lives of countless babies, and other families will not have to go through the kind of pain that we did.
People often underestimate Jeremy because he comes across as being such a polite and generous and nice person, and he is. But I remember hearing him warning the EU not to mistake British politeness for British weakness, and I thought that just about sums him up.
I was pessimistic about the London Olympics. I thought, we could mess this up. I remember talking to Jeremy in the build-up. He said, no, we're a great country. We can do this if we have the right mindset. The delivery was outstanding, but also had this element of fun. I know that Jeremy was very involved in getting that balance right.
He believes in Britain as a force for good in the world. He's shown strong values at the FCO and consistently good judgment.
Negotiating, toughing it out when things get really difficult, keeping going, having a vision. Those are the skills that we need in a Prime Minister.
He's a unifier. He's somebody who can reach out to different groups of people.
My dad always taught me that politics should be about making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And Jeremy made a huge difference to our lives. He gave us hope, and that for me was the main thing, that he gave us hope in some very, very dark days.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeremy Hunt.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here. Because we're in Cambridgeshire, just for today, I'm going to change my campaign slogan from "has to be Hunt" to "take a punt on Hunt." Sorry, I can do better. I can do better. I'm spying. I can see a few "has to be Hunt" stickers. I can see a few back Boris's. It reminds me of something Bruce Forsyth once said. He said, "Remember, only half the audience are ever going to like you. Don't worry about the other half, the bastards." But that is not us in the Conservative Party, because the Boris supporters, the Jeremy supporters, we are all going to come together after this as one united party, because that's what the country wants. Now, I'm standing here to tell you what I want to change as our Prime Minister. And to govern is to choose, and I've chosen 4 priorities, and I'm going to tell you all 4 of them. But we can't do any of them until we deliver Brexit. And on no-deal Brexit, October the 31st, there isn't a big difference between me and Boris. We both prefer a deal. We're both willing to leave without a deal if that's the only way to leave. We both like to leave by the 31st of October. Neither of us can control what Parliament does, and that's why I've been careful about not promising something I can't guarantee I will deliver. But the big question is, what is the quickest, safest way to leave the European Union by October the 31st? And the quickest way is to send a Prime Minister to Brussels who can actually negotiate a deal. And now I'm going to tell you why I'm that person. And I'm going to tell you something you may not have heard about me. I'm not sure whether it's got to Cambridgeshire. But if I become our next Prime Minister, I'll actually be the first Prime Minister who has been... who's called Jeremy. And who has been an entrepreneur. And I just want to do something here, which I've done everywhere. Just put up your hand if you set up your own business. And just look around, because doesn't that say everything about how brilliant our Conservative Party is? The party of doers, risk takers, wealth creators, people who create jobs for other people. And of course, what people who set up their own businesses do every day is they negotiate. Negotiate with suppliers, with customers, for leases on their properties. And that's what we need now. And I'm going to negotiate that deal. And when I have done that, what exciting things await our country. So as someone who set up a business, I want to fire up our economy to be the most pro-growth, pro-enterprise, greenest, high-tech economy in Europe. Our big opportunity as a country, we have in this country, and you know this here better than anyone, we have the best universities in the world. We also have, as you have at the Science Park, the best tech entrepreneurs, more medicines being developed here. Put all that together, and we could be the world's next Silicon Valley. And you have, I think at Cambridge, not just the University of Darwin, Newton, but more patents than anywhere else in the country. Pains me as an Oxford man, but I can tell you that Oxford is going to provide our next Prime Minister. I say that sotto voce. But we have that potential, and that will set this country up for the 21st century, because in 10 years' time, we're not, thankfully, going to be talking about Brexit. We're going to be talking about driverless cars, our Amazon deliveries coming by drone, artificial intelligence, and this is where we need to be as a country. But most importantly, if we do that, when it comes to those trade negotiations, the EU will need us every bit as much as we need them. And we are going to be negotiating from strength, ladies and gentlemen, from strength. Number two, I'm the Foreign Secretary who wants our great country to walk tall in the world. And didn't the Royal Navy do a brilliant job protecting British shipping this week? And I have said that I will spend more money on our armed forces. And I'll do that not just because the world is becoming a more dangerous place when you look at Russia or the Gulf or wherever, but because at the point of Brexit, I want to send a signal to the world that this special country, alongside the United States, one of the very few countries to have always stood up for democratic values, for the security that you need to underpin those values. This special country is here, we're back, we're fighting for our values, and our voice is going to be strong in the world. And that is what we are going to be post-Brexit. That's two. Then three, I would be the first Prime Minister, this is one, a new one, I'd be the first Prime Minister who has been responsible for our NHS. And that was a very, very great privilege for me. But it's also something very important about our values, because the world outside, they know we are wealth creators and entrepreneurs. They know we know how to run the economy. They don't always know about our compassionate values as Conservatives. And we have to have a social mission as well as an economic mission. And I want our social mission to be not health, although I will always stand up for our NHS. I want it to be education. Because in modern Britain today, believe it or not, still a quarter of our primary school leavers can't read properly. And we're the party that wants to put a ladder in front of every single young person when they start out on their life. The first rung of that ladder has to be able to read. And I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes the scourge of illiteracy in our society so that we really can put that ladder in front of every single person. And then my final commitment. I promise you I will not take us into a general election until we have got more young people voting Conservative. We can't be the party of aspiration unless the most aspirational people in our country are supporting us. I've got a bunch of policies, we can talk about those in a moment, to attract young people. But there's one very, very important reason why we have to do this. Attracting young people was the heart of why Corbyn was successful at the last election. We have got to get them back, because with Jeremy Corbyn, we have the most ruthless, dangerous, anti-British, anti-Western, anti-Semitic, hard-left Labour Party we have ever had in British politics. We must never let them near Downing Street. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this big, big moment for our party and our country, get things wrong, and we could have no Conservative government, no Brexit, maybe even no Conservative Party. But get it right, and we will deliver Brexit, unite our party, unleash the incredible potential of our country, and send Corbyn packing. And that's what I'm going to do. Thank you very much.
Jeremy, I'm going to start with the same question that I put to Boris about press freedom. We've had the Metropolitan Police intervening, not some junior officer, it's a very, very senior man, Neil Basu, effectively saying, well, this is what he said. He's advised newspaper editors that they could face criminal charges under the Official Secrets Act if they publish more diplomatic cables. What's your reaction to that?
Well, two things. I do think that an important thing in our country is that the police operate independently from politicians, and they have to make decisions as to whether to prosecute people for criminal actions, and it has to be completely separate to what people like me do, and they have to do their duty. But I think it is also very important to defend in a free society the right of the press to publish material that they think is in the public interest. Leaks that they get, it obviously mustn't breach the Official Secrets Act, but in the 21st century, the big dividing line is going to be between open societies and closed societies, and we stand for an open society. The Enlightenment, which started, in many ways, started in Cambridge. All that started because we allowed free debate between people. So we must never lose sight of the value of a free press.
Do you think the Mail on Sunday should hand back the documents that they are apparently going to publish tomorrow and not publish them?
Well, they have to make a judgment about their duty as journalists, and the police have to make a judgment about their responsibility to catch criminals, and they judge this may be a criminal act. And I think these are finely balanced judgments that actually depend on the material that they have. So if there was a classified document, or if there was a document a journalist had that said that a senior politician had been taking bribes, then the newspapers would publish that because they would make a judgment that was in the public interest. They have to make that finely balanced judgment this time. It's not for me to make that judgment, nor is it for me to second-guess the police. But what I will do is defend both the independence of the police and the independence of our press as they make those decisions.
Immigration is something which hasn't come up a huge amount at the hustings so far. Do you agree with Theresa May's 10,000 target?
No.
Under 100,000?
I think we have to... That was a target that we committed to as a party before the Brexit referendum, when there was huge concern that we weren't able to control our our immigration levels because of being in free movement inside the EU. In a post-Brexit world, it is different because we will have control of our borders. That's one of the big things that people were voting for. So we need to have a different approach. And I think we need to recognise that people want to bring down levels of migration. But the smart way to do this is not to do it in a way that makes it difficult for farmers who need seasonal workers or for businesses who need to employ people. Look at the NHS. The thing that has been ridiculous for many years in the NHS is that we have been importing lots of foreign doctors and nurses who, by the way, do a brilliant job. We'd fall over without them. But at the same time, we have thousands of young people here who want to train as a doctor and can't get into medical college. So the way you bring down migration levels is by bringing up the skills of our own people. And I talked about literacy. That's one of the things that you can do to raise people's skills levels, but lots of other things as well.
You were Health Secretary for 6 years. Did you not ever feel a slight sense of guilt that we are importing all of these doctors and nurses from countries, frankly, that need them more than we do?
Yes. And actually, it is wrong. I think, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we have hundreds, if not thousands, of doctors from some of the poorest countries in Africa. And they are brilliant doctors, and as I say, we need them in the NHS, but that system is very, very wrong. We should be training the number of doctors and the number of nurses that we need for ourselves, and that's why I was very proud that the first thing that I persuaded Theresa May to do for the NHS when she became Prime Minister was the biggest ever increase in doctor and nurse training places, went up by 25%. That's going to take time for that to feed through, but that will make a big difference to the NHS going forward.
More than 10 years ago, Boris Johnson floated the idea of an amnesty for long-term illegal immigrants to regularise their status. And a few minutes ago, he didn't resile from that at all. In fact, said that that's something that should happen now. What's your view on that?
I'm cautious. I respect the generous instincts that says that sometimes you need to do something to regularise the status of people who've been here a long time, maybe have families here, can't get a national insurance number. But the reason I'm cautious is because the risk you take is that you then get an upsurge in more illegal migration because of the signal it sends. So I think the right approach, for example, to the Mediterranean migration and those heartbreaking scenes we saw on TV is to stop the people traffickers making those journeys in the first place. And I think we need to think carefully about unintended consequences.
Are you getting enough sleep?
Well, I read that headline that the NHS is about to tell us how much sleep we need. And for the last 6 months, I've been wearing one of these Fitbits, which actually tells you how much sleep that you should be getting. And the scary thing about it is that it turns out that I'm awake for about an hour a night, worrying about the hustings and things like that. Not actually. You do them in a very nice way. But I think that sleep is very important. It's a very important thing for health purposes.
No, but the point of asking the question is, I am sick to death of government thinking it can interfere in areas that it has no business in whatsoever.
Yes, well, I think that any advice that came would be advice. I actually think, look, you got a good round of applause for that, Ian, and I'm the one who's supposed to be getting the rounds of applause. I'm going to take a risk. I will defend the right of the NHS to give us information, but I don't think it should be prescriptive or a nanny state or bossy. But I think we do need to know these things. And when I was Health Secretary, I discovered that because of the improved knowledge we have and improvements in medicine, for every 8 years that we live, our life expectancy now goes up by 1 year. So that means that for the 6 years that I was Health Secretary, I actually put 8 months on everyone here's life. And I hope you remember that when you vote.
Have you ever doubted your conservatism?
No, I really haven't. And when I was really thinking, look, I came from a conservative family, so I'm sure it was the natural resting place for me to be a conservative. But when I was thinking through these things for the first time, I went backpacking in my year off to India. And I remember going through the slums in India, and actually I lived on a village in a part of southern India for a month where, you know, they only had some electricity, no running water. And I remember thinking the thing that would transform India is capitalism, is a market economy that's going to create the wealth for all the things that we take for granted in this country. And so that actually made me more conservative. But the other reason I've never doubted it is because we are compassionate people. And what the left tells us in every election is that we're the party that doesn't care. It's absolute nonsense. And it's Conservatives who get the money for the NHS and our vital public services because we know how to grow the economy. And when I was Health Secretary, I had 2 elections in a row where Labour were trying to make that charge that we didn't care and make it into a referendum on the NHS. And I was able to say, as I looked straight down the barrel of those cameras, there will be more money for the NHS under the Conservatives because only we know how to grow the economy.
Right, let's go to your questions. And the gentleman who's standing up in the middle there, if we go to him first, please, and then we'll have a lady down the front here.
John Bald, Chairman, Conservative Education Society. The government school reforms have been hit very hard recently by some very well publicised scandals. How are you going to prevent the newly formed multi-academy chains from falling into the very bad habits of the local authorities that they're intended to replace?
Thank you, John. We need to look at all these things. I think we need to recognise that when you have free schools, multi-academy chains and so on, these are new things. They've been overwhelmingly successful, but you are going to take some risks and there are going to be some things that go wrong, and we shouldn't allow the things that go wrong cloud the fact that since 2010 we've got more than 2 million children going to good or outstanding schools, a huge achievement, particularly for Michael Gove, and I modelled my reforms on the NHS on some of the things that he did, and I got 3 million more patients using good or outstanding hospitals because of that basic rule that if you want to raise standards, you have to be honest when they're not good. You can't sweep it under the carpet, whether it's an unsafe care in a hospital or low standards of education in a school. So I think they are good reforms, but I think if we have a blind spot on education, it's not the 50% of school leavers who go to university, where I think now, in many cases, you will get as good an education in the state system as you would in a private school. And that's a fantastic Conservative achievement. It's the half of school leavers who don't go to university. I think it's not just literacy, but we should promise that every single one of them will leave school with a rigorous qualification like they would in Switzerland or Germany, a technical qualification that means that they can get a decently paid job. And that, I think, has been a blind spot that we need to put right.
Lady here.
Margaret Turner from Bedford. I admire what you said about technology, but East Anglia has a lot of small to medium-sized towns with town centres that are dying slowly, with growing elderly population because the younger people tend to gravitate towards the cities. So I wonder what a government that you would lead might be able to do to use technology in a positive way to help those small to medium-sized towns, not just our cities.
Well, thank you, Margaret, for the question. And if you take a town like Bedford, or a town that I represent like Farnham or Godalming, what you see is a big challenge for high street shops, which is caused by the online revolution and the fact that we are now, using the convenience of Amazon to buy so much stuff, and there is less footfall than there was previously for the kind of things that people would previously buy when they go out on foot. And So as one of my business tax cuts, I want to do the most radical cut in corporation tax that we've ever had, down to 12.5%, the levels that they have in Ireland. By the way, I think that would be brilliant no-deal preparation, as well as being something that would be very, very good to create a strong enterprise economy. But another cut I want to do is to take 90% of high street shops out of business rates altogether, so that they can change their business model to adapt to the internet world. Because I think we want to have busy high streets as hubs of our community. And I will do that quite quickly, not least because I want to win Bedford back for the Conservatives.
Just to clarify on the corporation tax cut, and you said it would be ideal preparation for a no deal. If your Chancellor introduced a budget before October the 31st, would you then intend to make that cut immediately, or would it be done in stages over years?
I'd want to make it immediately as part of, I want to do this anyway. And I just want to tell you why, Ian. Ireland introduced 12.5% corporation tax. By the way, this is not a tax that people are particularly asking for on the doorstep, but I'll tell you why it's the right thing to do. When Ireland introduced that tax, their GDP per head was a quarter less than ours. They were poorer than us as a country. Now it is nearly 50% higher. And with a corporation tax cut, you get about half the money back over time because of increased growth in the economy. And what I want to do is what President Trump did. As you'll know from this week, I don't always agree with President Trump, but on this, he was very, very smart. He introduced some big business tax cuts, and the growth in the American economy is double ours. They're growing at 3% a year. We're just 1.5% a year. So I want to do it. I want to do it right away, though, because if there's a no-deal Brexit, then that is going to create pressure on the economy, and I want to give our businesses the extra resilience of being able to keep more of their profits.
But there are lots of things in the Irish economy that have contributed to that rise in GDP. President Trump's tax cuts, they weren't just all about corporation tax. Isn't that just a blunt instrument that you're trying to use here? There are lots of other things that need to be done too.
Yes, my tax cut package is not just corporation tax, it's business rates, it's also capital allowances, which is a very big way to stimulate investment. So it's a big package of tax cuts. But I think it's the right approach. And in the case of Ireland, they created advantage because they made themselves the European hub for big computer companies. But they don't have Oxford and Cambridge and London and Manchester and our great universities. We could really use this to turn ourselves into that Silicon Valley.
If you don't win this contest, would you like to be Chancellor of the Exchequer in a Boris Johnson government to do that sort of thing?
It'd be such a great story, wouldn't it, for the media if I answered that question, Ian? But it
you
is.
usually do answer the question.
I'm good at answering the question, but it's not relevant because I'm going to win this contest.
Proof there that I am no Andrew Neil. Lady there, and actually let's have someone at the back. Right at the back, the guy waving, yes.
Thank you. My question is that given we're meant to be the party for self-employed, do you think it's right that if you're self-employed, you have no access to paternity leave? And another element of that is, would you be supportive of extended leave in the cases of premature birth?
Thank you. On that latter one, I would actually, because I've spoken to many people during my time as Health Secretary, and I know that it can be incredibly traumatic, and particularly if it has an influence on the child. So I would be very supportive of that. I think we have to be a party that removes glass ceilings. And one of the most interesting challenges that I've had in these hustings was a woman who said to me, look, I can get maternity leave, but that doesn't work if you're an entrepreneur. And what can you do? And that got me thinking about how you do that. And I don't have an answer to that, except, funnily enough, to say that in other countries like Italy, they have a very strong tradition of family businesses. And family businesses are very supportive to female bosses who need to take time off because they have those structures in place. As far as the self-employed are concerned, I think we need to look at everything we can do to support self-employed people. I am in favour of extending paternity leave. I understand the concerns that some small businesses have. But I also think that if we're going to have proper equality between men and women, we need to make it as easy as possible for that burden to be shared equally.
Right. The questioner right at the back and then in the middle here. I think it's a lady, but I'm not 100%. Yeah, it is.
Having served as Health Secretary, I'm sure you're very aware of the damaging effect of drug taking on people's physical and mental health in society. And it's very widespread, obviously, in society, just as widespread as it was, or more widespread perhaps than 30 years ago when I first went to university. So having seen all that, and then everyone in the room being aware of the damaging effect of the criminality that goes with the drug trade, would you be open to the idea of a serious review, a serious study of the effectiveness of current drug policy and the war on drugs, with a view to taking some possibly hard moral choices about what would be effective, what is the most effective way to deal with it?
Well, I had this discussion while I was Health Secretary a number of times, and I don't think that our system works as well as it might in many ways. My concern about, if I just go straight to the point, my concern about something like the legalization of cannabis is that I have met too many families who had a child who found themselves triggered into bipolar disorder or a serious medical condition from the use of cannabis. So I would be concerned not to make a change that increased the overall usage of cannabis amongst young people. But I think we should keep the evidence under review. And I think the one trick we've really missed in this is I've never understood why we can't make our prisons completely drugs-free with airport-style security.
But a military strategist would tell you that if a war is unwinnable, do not fight it. And the war on drugs clearly has not been working, has it?
Well, I'm not sure that is fair. I think that we have had good progress in terms of reducing addiction to hard drugs over recent years. But I don't say it's perfect. I think we should look at all the independent evidence. Countries like Canada and Portugal have taken a different tack, and if there was evidence that they reduced overall use of hard and soft drugs by taking a different approach, I would look at that evidence, but that would be my priority.
Right. I can't remember where I went. There, lady there, and then gentleman there.
Thank you. Hello. My name's Fiona and I'm from Peterborough. My question is, if we have another general election coming up fairly soon, what is your attitude to postal voting? Because it seems to me that it's very open to abuse, and in our recent by-election in Peterborough, Labour got in by a small majority, and it is possible that a lot of that was due to the postal vote.
Well, thank you, Fiona. First of all, for campaigning. Thank you for campaigning for Paul Bristow, who I think would have made a brilliant MP for Peterborough, and I was very sad that he didn't get in. We have done, I think, a lot in our time in office to deal with voter fraud, and we've been looking at individual registration of voters to try and prevent voter fraud. I think it's very important that we look at the things that you've talked about. I think we also need to look at something else, funnily enough, which I've realised as Foreign Secretary, which is this new tactic by countries like Russia to try and interfere in electoral processes in democracies by putting out all sorts of fake news on Facebook and other social media platforms. And we have no evidence that it's affected the course of any elections or referenda in this country. But if you go to somewhere like Ukraine, you see they are having to fight a war on this front the whole time. So, as we start to have a world where there are democracies and countries that don't share our values, we have to, at all costs, prevent people worrying that they can't trust the outcome of elections.
I'm going to risk getting a round of applause again for this question, I'm afraid. But isn't it about time that we abolished the Electoral Commission? Come on!
We need an electoral commission that does its job with due impartiality.
But is this Electoral Commission doing its job when it clearly hasn't been able to rectify the things that Fiona was talking about? You have the Metropolitan Police criticising it in the last couple of weeks for its incompetence in delivering evidence on the Leave.eu inquiry, and I could go on, but it's not exactly doing a lot of good at the moment, is it?
Well, incompetence in any public body needs to be called out. That doesn't necessarily mean scrapping it. It might mean getting the right people to run it.
That was where I was heading. Right, the gentleman there, and then the lady over here. And then I'll come to the back again, I promise. Just to see the microphone's on when it's handed to you, please.
Yes.
As Gordon Brown once famously forgot.
Yes, I won't talk about ladies and immigrants in Poland then. My name's Stephen Ridley. I'm District Councillor from South Norfolk. Unlike yourself, Jeremy, and Boris for that matter, I'm old enough to have voted in the referendum of 1975. I voted no in that referendum, and I've opposed the European Union and all its various iterations ever since. Now, can you tell me why I should feel confident in someone like yourself, who, if I may, with respect, refer to you as a born-again convert to the Leave cause, as someone who voted Remain as a short time ago as 2016? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And of course, us born-agains are far more fanatical than the original people. And I'll tell you why. Two reasons. First of all, why did I vote Remain? You're quite correct, I did. It's because I was worried about those economic forecasts. We all remember them, you know, immediate collapse in house prices, share prices, emergency budgets, slashing money from our public services, and I was wrong to believe those forecasts, and our economy turned out to be much, much more resilient. But the main reason is because as Foreign Secretary, I go around the world and I have noticed that other countries have a whole lot more respect for us than we sometimes have for ourselves. And why is that? It is because we are one of the oldest and most robust democracies in the world. And what does that mean? It means a country where politicians like me do what the people tell us to do. And Brexit is a big test of that, because the political establishment, much of it didn't want to leave the EU, and we have to show the world that we are that democracy. How could I stand up for democratic rights in Hong Kong if I'm not standing up for them forcefully at home? And that's what I'll always do.
Right, over here. Then the arm with the blue sleeve going up it.
Margaret Maybury, District Councillor for Baber, which is in Suffolk. And I hold the privilege of looking after Lavenham, which is the most preserved medieval village. My question is on schools. In Lavenham, we have a primary school which is completely landlocked and over capacity. How would you make sure that places like Lavenham have new primary schools?
Well, thank you, Margaret, for that question. And forgive me for a lack of detailed knowledge of the primary school in Lavenham in terms of geography. But what I think I can do is talk about the funding of our schools, which is very important if they need to expand however they want to expand. And I do think
that we need to find more money for our education system. But I would do it in the way that I did in the NHS. I wouldn't just say, here's the money, off you go. I would say, I want a 10-year plan from the education system that is going to show me how you are going to abolish illiteracy, make sure everyone has rigorous qualifications if they don't go to university. I want to see how those reforms are done. On literacy, for example, you can deal with it because we know that the children that struggle to read are the children whose parents don't read to them. And you can identify that even when a child is 4 before they've started to learn to read. And then you can put in the support so that by the time they get to 11, they haven't fallen behind other children. But anyway, the money will be there, part of a long-term deal that will have reform of the education system, the rising of standards that we need. And I think that's the way we can make progress.
Right, the blue arm at the back, it's actually behind you, sir, and then we'll have the gentleman here. Well, it wasn't you, but never mind.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey. I live in Cambridge and I'm a chemical researcher. And I'm starting a new job soon in October in Berlin doing chemical research. I'm wondering what your sort of policy vision is for maintaining UK's links on research with existing European partners as well as towards the wider world. So most of our funding is through, for example, the Horizon 2020, the Horizon framework. So how will you plan on expanding, or what would you like to do with that sort of policy?
Well, Jeffrey, I'm sorry to lose you to Berlin, but if Jeremy Hunt becomes Prime Minister, you'll be coming back to Cambridge very, very soon, because this is where it's all going to be happening. And I want to make absolutely sure that our universities don't lose out from leaving the EU, because we have 4 of the world's top 10 universities in this country. The rest of Europe doesn't have any in the top 20. And this is one of the big things that sets us up for the 21st century. And what I want to do is to encourage people like you not just to do brilliant research into chemicals or whatever it is, but actually to do what happens a lot more in America than it happens here, which is to set up a business, to set up a spin-off from a university and to build that into a multi-million-pound international business. And there is nowhere in Britain that is doing that better than Cambridge. And so that is really what we want to happen all over the country. And so enjoy your time, but I hope it's brief.
And will you commit to matching the money that UK universities lose out on by not being in the EU? Will you provide that from UK sources?
I'm not going to commit to like a pound for pound matching, but I hope I will be able to deliver it. My priority would be to make sure that sectors that particularly suffer because of a change in funding when we leave the EU, universities are one, farmers are another. I don't want them to experience a big shock in terms of their income, because we want them all to succeed.
Okay, right, gentleman there, and there were lots of blue arm sleeves, so I'm going to go for another one at the back, over there.
Good afternoon, Andy Thomas from South Norfolk, and I'm not a councillor. We seem to spend an awful lot of money on overseas aid, and a lot of that seems to be wasted and going to countries that are richer than ours. Would you reduce that spending to help the police, the NHS, vulnerable people, and address the issues in the UK rather than stuffing it overseas? And
Andy, very good question, and something I think that a lot of people here would have sympathy with. But let me tell you that I was very proud when we came to office in 2010. We had that very difficult recession that we had to deal with. We had to make cuts in public spending here. That we maintained our aid budget, because I think that spoke for our compassionate values as a country. But I don't agree with the rules around how aid is spent. I think it's ridiculous, for example, that if the Royal Navy helps Caribbean islands that have a hurricane, that can't count, because you can't ever count the use of anyone in uniform in terms of aid spending. But if you're going to do what I just said, which is protect our aid budget, then you have to answer the question as to how you're going to find money for the NHS, the social care system, the police. And I think the answer to that is to be a smart Conservative government that really knows how to grow the economy. So if we got our growth rates up to American levels, that would be an extra £20 billion of headroom that we could use for public services or for tax cuts. And this is what is so brilliant about our party. We understand that insight in the way that other parties don't, and that's what we have to deliver.
Okay. Right at the back, and then because he's stood up so... That guy there. No, the one next to you, actually. Go on.
Thank you. Jeremy, I'm the prospective parliamentary candidate for North Norfolk, Duncan Baker, taking over from you, Ian, a few years ago.
Indeed.
We're quite looking forward to a general election in North Norfolk because we're going to beat Sir Norman Lamb after nearly 20 years. In North Norfolk, it's a beautiful part of the country, but there's lots of retiring people. It's an older demographic. We talked about pouring money into the NHS. What are you going to do for our elderly and our social care system that clearly is underfunded?
Thank you, Duncan. We had to make very difficult cuts in 2010. My own department, I had to cut 25%, and we were right to do that because we put the economy back on its feet. And I think George Osborne and David Cameron did the right thing. But I do think there were two areas where, with the benefit of hindsight, austerity went too far. One of them was police numbers, and I think that's led to problems with knife crime, and the other is the social care system. And I think Conservatives are the party that believes in fairness between the generations, and we would always want a society in which every single older person is treated with dignity and respect. So I think the solution for social care is partly about some more funding for local councils who I think are struggling. But it's also about personal responsibility. And as we live much longer, we need to encourage people when they're young to save for their social care costs, those last few months of your life when you may need very intensive care, in the same way that we encourage people to save for their pensions. And so I would favour a system where we made it as easy as it is to save for your pension, maybe part of the same plan, but in that you are building up support for that period at the end of your life in a way that means that you don't have to worry about selling your home. And indeed, for me, the deal will be if you do the responsible thing when you're younger, then we will make sure that you can keep your assets and pass them on to your children when you die.
Just following up on that, can you also not do something for carers, where you have a ridiculous system where you have a carer who starts off in Great Yarmouth and then has another appointment 45 minutes later in North Walsham, which is sort of 30 miles away. They don't get paid for the time of travel, and they're probably on minimum wage as well. Now, most of us would want carers to be paid the proper rate for the job, and they're not being at the moment.
I agree with that, and that's why I was very proud when we introduced the national living wage, because that actually created a big increase in the funding for carers. And I think we should think about paid carers because of the issues you talk about. I think we should also think about unpaid carers and the incredible role families make, and what we can do to support three-generation families living in the same household. We've got 420,000 households in this country where you've got granny and grandpa, mum and dad, and the kids living under one roof. Now, I know it's not for everyone to live with their mother-in-law, and I wouldn't advocate this as national policy, but I think where that happens, it is... well, my grandparents, my wife's parents don't actually speak English, and we get on famously. They're coming to the UK on Sunday, actually. But I think we are the party of the family. And the serious point herein is that countries like Italy and Spain spend less than us on social care, but they don't have a social care crisis because they have kept their family structures stronger. And I think there are things we can learn from that.
I Are you going to bring your parents-in-law to the London hustings? That would be a bit of a culture shock, wouldn't it?
It might be. They're not Conservative Party members, but...
You never know. Right, it's the gentleman there.
You in?
No, it's working.
Hi. Sorry, Roger Harrison from St Neots, just up the road. That actually is in Cambridgeshire. Ian, you're quite wrong about the statement you said earlier. You don't understand the mind of the British soldier. If a war is unwinnable, then you train harder until it's not. And that side of my mentality is why Boris appeals to me. But I'm torn, because equally, as an ex-Conservative councillor, the attention to detail and the well-thought-out policy is why Jeremy appeals to me. So, Jeremy, can you tell me something truly inspirational that will help fix this country, that will help make my mind up today?
No pressure.
Wow. Look, I'm not going to give you a pat answer to that question. I'll tell you what I think is totally inspirational for me, and that was standing with President Trump, our closest ally, and Angela Merkel, whose country we fought at the D-Day commemorations. And I think, compared to the giants who fought for our country in 1944, all of us are pygmies, and all of us should remember that sacrifice, and all of us should have confidence in our country at a time of great challenge. We come from somewhere that has faced far, far bigger challenges in the past. And if you ask about inspiration, that's what inspires me.
I've got to go to the stick. The microphone is arriving.
My name's Alan. I'm a retired RAF officer. I was born and brought up in Edinburgh. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Where are you, Alan? Sorry, just put your hand... there you are. Sorry, I can see you now. Thank you, Alan.
I'll start again. My name's Alan. I'm a retired RAF officer. I was born and brought up in Scotland. But for the last 60 years, thanks to the RAF, I've lived in England. Nicola Sturgeon is determined to use Brexit as a net means of breaking up the United Kingdom. How do you plan to counter that?
Thank you. Well, let me start by saying that I think we were complacent about the Union in the run-up to the 2014 referendum, which I know from many people I've spoken to in Scotland was incredibly divisive. And I worry that we haven't thought hard enough about how to preserve our Union since that independence referendum, because every single day of the week, Nicola Sturgeon is plotting and planning to break up our Union, and we need to be every bit as smart as she is being to protect our Union. Now, I don't have any Scottish blood. I've got some Welsh blood and some Irish blood, but I grew up for 2 years of my childhood in Rosyth when my dad was posted to Scotland with the Navy. And I think that we need to look at things that we're not doing right at the moment. For example, at the moment, if the national government spends money in Scotland, it can only do so through the Scottish government. And what does Nicola Sturgeon do when she takes our money? She uses it to promote the separatist agenda. So we need to change things like that. We need to make absolutely sure that if we do have a no-deal Brexit, Scotland does not suffer, because we know how Nicola Sturgeon will try to use that against us. But I think, most of all, we have to be much more active in making the case, the emotional, the cultural, the historic case for our union. The best thing about our country is that mixture of talents from 4 very distinct, different nations. You bring it together with the United Kingdom and you get something absolutely magical. And we have to bang the drum for that, because that is what has made our country great.
Quick final question from the person there, this gentleman there.
Alistair Rust. I'm a retired police officer, having served 30 years in Cambridgeshire Police. I'm very keen and very pleased to hear that you intend to increase police numbers. I can assure everybody here that by the vast majority of the public long for the time when police patrols were seen on the street for reassurance and for gaining information regarding crime. Can you please say how soon you'll be implementing your police numbers, and particularly for Cambridgeshire?
Thank you. Well, I've highlighted that as one of the two areas which would be a priority. I believe we have the headroom in our national accounts, which I still, by the way, would stick to the rule that we have to carry on reducing debt as a proportion of our GDP over the cycle, because I don't think Conservatives rack up debts for future generations. But within that rule, I believe there is room to find money for an extra 20,000 police officers. Where I want to be straight with you is that if we had a no-deal Brexit, our first priority is going to have to be the farmers and the businesses that are directly affected by a potential economic shock. So it would take longer to find money for things like the social care system and the police in that no-deal situation. But I'm hoping to avoid that no-deal situation by negotiating a deal. And thank you for asking me about police numbers, which is a problem that can be solved, and not about police IT systems, which is, I fear, a problem that can never be solved.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Hunt. I'm going to do something now which I did in Cheltenham last night. I'm going to ask you for a show of hands. How many of you came here this morning undecided about who you would vote for? Put your hands down. And how many know now who you would vote for? Of those, so virtually all of you. My mission is accomplished, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.